Picture this. The year's 1470 BCE. You're a court scribe in Thebes. You've served 3 pharaohs. You've documented wars, famines, floods. You've written eulogies for queens and victory proclamations for generals. But today, you're ordered to record something that will haunt you until your death. The new pharaoh, who took the throne 6 months ago, has just issued a decree. It's written on papyrus. It bears the royal seal, and it orders something that violates every natural law you've ever known. The pharaoh is taking his full sister as his great royal wife, not symbolic, not ceremonial, as his actual wife and mother of his heirs. His name is Ahmose II, but history will remember him by another designation. The pharaoh who turned incest into industrial policy. You're holding the stylus. Your hand is shaking. The overseer is watching. You have to write. So you do. And what you record will remain sealed in royal archives for 3,400 years, until archaeologists break through a hidden chamber in the Karnak temple complex and find documentation that changes our understanding of Egyptian royal practices forever. Here's what most people get wrong about ancient Egypt. We see the art, the idealized paintings, the majestic statues, and we assume the royalty was divine, pure, untouchable. The reality was so much darker. If you believe that the documented physical evidence from ancient civilizations must be studied and understood, no matter how disturbing, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support helps us examine the archaeological truth behind the myths that textbooks prefer to simplify. Let me take you back to where this starts. Egypt, 18th dynasty, approximately 1550 BCE. The royal family has just expelled the Hyksos invaders and reunified the kingdom. It's a time of pride, power, and paranoia. The new dynasty faces a problem. How to keep power concentrated within the family when every nobleman, general, and priest wants influence. How to ensure absolute control when the kingdom spans from Nubia to Syria. The solution they develop is breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. They decide that the pharaoh's divine blood must remain undiluted. That means marriage within the family. Not distant cousins, not carefully selected nobles, sisters, daughters, sometimes both sometimes. Here's where the archaeological evidence becomes impossible to ignore. In 2008, researchers led by Dr. Zahi Hawass conducted DNA analysis on royal mummies from the 18th dynasty. The results, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, revealed something stunning. Multiple pharaohs showed genetic markers consistent with being children of full sibling parents, not half-siblings. Full siblings. The study examined the mummy believed to be Tutankhamun, his parents, full brother and sister. The genetic evidence is unambiguous. Identical alleles across multiple chromosomes that only occur when both parents share both parents themselves. But Tutankhamun wasn't an exception. He was the culmination of at least 5 generations of systematic incestuous breeding, documented through DNA analysis, written records, and the physical evidence locked in mummified remains. Let me show you how the machine worked. Act 1 of the system, the royal harem, as breeding ground. You're a daughter of the pharaoh. You're 12 years old. You've been raised in the women's quarters of the palace with your sisters and half-sisters. There are dozens of you, because pharaohs had multiple wives and concubines. One morning, court officials arrive. They're not servants. They're priests and bureaucrats carrying papyrus scrolls. They examine you and your sisters, measure your heights, inspect your teeth, check for deformities. They're not being kind. They're not being paternal. They're selecting breeding stock. Here's what the papyrus records from Thebes show, translated by Egyptologist Professor Christiane Desroches Noblicourt. The royal household kept meticulous records of princesses, names, birth dates, physical descriptions, and crucially bloodline purity. Princesses born to the great royal wife, the pharaoh's primary consort who was usually his sister, were marked as pure blood. These were the most valuable for continuing the dynasty. Think about what that means. You're not a princess, you're inventory. Human livestock bred for genetic purity that would turn out to be genetic catastrophe. By age 13 or 14, the selection is Medetza. If you're chosen, you're elevated to king's wife. Not metaphorically, literally. You will marry your father. You will bear his children. And those children, if they survive, and the evidence shows many didn't, will continue the cycle. The palace architects designed specific quarters for this system. Excavations at Malkata Palace, the royal residence of Amenhotep III, revealed separate wings connected by private corridors, one wing for the pharaoh's chambers, adjacent wings for his wives, arranged by rank. The great royal wife, his full sister, had the largest apartment closest to his chambers. Secondary wives, often his daughters from previous marriages, occupied progressively smaller rooms. Archaeological evidence shows these weren't just living spaces. They were breeding cells designed to maximize royal offspring while maintaining strict hierarchy. Act 2 of the system, the genetic nightmare. Here's what nobody tells you about sustained, incestuous breeding. It doesn't create gods, it creates suffering. The DNA study published in JAMA showed that royal mummies from the 18th dynasty exhibited genetic disorders consistent with inbreeding depression. Specifically, accumulation of recessive genetic disorders. CT scans of royal mummies revealed bone malformations, shortened limbs, club feet, and spinal curvature at rates far exceeding normal population. Tutankhamun's mummy showed necrosis of bone tissue in his left foot, likely caused by genetic bone disorders. His skull shape indicates potential hydrocephalus. His pelvis shows female characteristics possibly caused by hormone imbalances from genetic defects. He died at 19, most likely from complications of malaria combined with genetic immune deficiency and bone disease. But the machine kept running because the system wasn't designed to create healthy heirs. It was designed to create controllable ones. Think about the psychology of this. If you're a pharaoh born from brother-sister parents, raised to marry your own sister, and expected to produce heirs with her, your entire worldview is shaped by normalized incest. You don't question it. You can't. To question it is to question your own existence, your own legitimacy, your own divinity, so you perpetuate the machine. And the evidence shows they did for at least 5 generations, possibly more. The 18th dynasty systematically bred within immediate family lines. The papyrus records are chillingly bureaucratic. Marriage contracts between fathers and daughters, between brothers and sisters, recorded by scribes, witnessed by priests, sanctified by religious ceremony. It wasn't hidden, it was official policy. Act 3 of the system, the sexual reality. Here's where we have to confront something deeply uncomfortable. These weren't symbolic marriages. The whole point was producing heirs, which means these relationships were consummated, repeatedly, documented through pregnancy records, birth announcements, and the children who survived long enough to be mummified. A papyrus fragment from the reign of Amenhotep III, translated by Egyptologist Professor Jacobus van Dijk, records the birth of a daughter to the pharaoh and his daughter Sitamun. The text explicitly identifies Sitamun as both daughter and wife. The child born from that union lived 3 years. Her mummy, discovered in the royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, shows severe spinal malformations. Think about what that means. A father impregnated his own daughter. The resulting child suffered documented genetic disorders. And the system not only allowed this, it documented it with bureaucratic precision. The birth was recorded. The child was given royal titles. She was mummified with full honors when she died. Her tomb inscription, still visible in the Valley of the Kings, identifies her parentage without shame or concealment. Because in the machinery of royal incest, suffering wasn't a bug. It was an expected outcome. What mattered was maintaining the system, producing heirs, keeping power concentrated within the narrowest possible bloodline. If this evidence of systematic genetic catastrophe doesn't move you, to question what institutions will do to maintain power. You might be missing the lesson that DNA and mummies are teaching us across 3,400 years. Here's what makes this especially disturbing. The Egyptian priests and palace officials weren't ignorant. They could see the results: the birth defects, the early deaths, the children born unable to walk or speak. The Turin Canon, a fragmentary king list from the 19th dynasty, shows unusually short reigns for several 18th dynasty pharaohs. Multiple rulers who died as teenagers or young adults. Succession crises caused by pharaohs dying without surviving heirs. They knew the breeding program was creating genetic weakness, but they continued anyway. Because the alternative, diluting the royal bloodline by marrying outside immediate family, meant sharing power. And power, once concentrated, is never voluntarily dispersed. Act 4 of the system, the inevitable collapse. By the time we get to Tutankhamun, the genetic damage is catastrophic. His CT scan, conducted in 2005, revealed a body riddled with inherited disorders. Clubfoot, spinal curvature, elongated skull possibly indicating hormonal imbalance. Bone necrosis in the left foot, so evidence of multiple malaria infections that a healthy immune system might have fought off. He was 19 when he died. His wife, Ankhesenamun, was his half-sister. She bore 2 children during their marriage. Both were stillborn and mummified with full royal honors in tiny coffins found in Tutankhamun's tomb. The DNA analysis showed both fetuses had severe genetic abnormalities. One had spina bifida. The other had Sprengel's deformity of the spine. These conditions are consistent with inbreeding depression. The genetic load accumulated over 5 generations had become incompatible with survival. The 18th dynasty effectively ended with Tutankhamun. His successor I ruled 4 years. Then Horemheb, a general with no royal blood, seized power and erased the names of the incestuous pharaohs from official records. The machine had consumed itself. Here's what happened to the evidence. For 3,000 years, the truth about Egyptian royal incest was known only through hints in classical sources. Greek historians like Diodorus Siculus mentioned Egyptian customs that allowed sibling marriage, but their accounts were often dismissed as exaggeration or anti-Egyptian propaganda. Then archaeologists started finding the papyri, the marriage contracts, the birth records, the tomb inscriptions that explicitly identified wives as daughters and sisters. Then came DNA analysis, and the genetic evidence made denial impossible. Multiple royal mummies showed the unmistakable markers of sustained close relative breeding. The physical evidence: malformed bones, genetic disorders. Stillborn children told a story the hieroglyphs had recorded, but scholars had been reluctant to fully acknowledge it. This wasn't metaphorical divine marriage. This was systematic incestuous breeding over multiple generations, documented through bureaucratic records and preserved in the DNA of mummified remains. Here's what we should learn from this. The Egyptian royal incest program shows us what happens when power becomes more important than human welfare. When maintaining control justifies any level of suffering. When institutions document horror and call it divine right. The scribes who recorded those marriage contracts weren't just witnesses. They were participants in a system that produced generation after generation of genetically damaged children in service to political power concentration. The priests who sanctified those marriages weren't just efficient. They were enablers of systematic genetic catastrophe. And the pharaohs who perpetuated the system weren't mad. They were calculating, cold, willing to sacrifice their own children's health to maintain absolute power. The machine ran for at least 5 generations. It produced documented suffering preserved in mummies we can study today. It ended only when the genetic damage became so severe that the dynasty collapsed from biological failure. That's the truth that DNA evidence has forced us to confront. The pyramids are magnificent. The art is beautiful. The hieroglyphs are elegant. But behind that facade was a system that treated human beings, royal children, as breeding stock in service to power, documenting every birth, every marriage, every genetic catastrophe with bureaucratic precision. Think about that the next time you see a documentary glorifying ancient Egypt. The cost of those monuments was paid not just by slaves building blocks. It was paid by children born with genetic disorders, by stillborn babies mummified in tiny coffins, by young pharaohs dying at 19 after lives of documented suffering, and it was all recorded, preserved, waiting 3,400 years for DNA analysis to reveal what the hieroglyphs had been saying all along. What does this tell us about power, about institutions, about what human beings will do to maintain control? It tells us that documentation doesn't equal accountability. That recorded horror isn't the same as confronted horror. That systems can preserve evidence of their own atrocities and still call themselves divine. The Egyptian scribes wrote down everything: the marriages, the births, the children who died. They mummified the evidence. They sealed it in tombs. They left us a complete record of systematic suffering in service to power. And for 3,000 years we looked at that evidence and called it civilization. Maybe it's time we called it what the DNA evidence shows it really was: a genetic nightmare documented with bureaucratic precision by a system that valued power more than the children it destroyed to maintain it. If this archaeological and genetic evidence exposed something history textbooks prefer to romanticize, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're going to keep examining the scientific truth behind ancient civilizations. Drop a comment with your thoughts on how DNA evidence is rewriting history. I'll see you in the next investigation, where we let the mummies speak the truth that hieroglyphs recorded, but scholarship ignored for centuries.